and welcome everyone. I'm Danny, and I'm excited to be bringing my friend Joseph Gallagher, who is the author of three amazing books: The Quantum Kingdom Within, Collapsing Reality, and The Quantum Gospels. And Joseph, in these books, they are amazing. He ties in ancient wisdom with modern quantum physics. And when he does that, the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels just come alive in a way that Christianity has never presented them. So, Joseph, I want to just bring you right on. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, Danny. How are you? It's nice to be speaking with you again.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Well,
just totally different.
let me flip the script here a wee bit. And I hadn't intended doing this, so I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. But
Okay.
let me reverse roles here for a wee while today, and I'll interview
Okay.
you. So
Okay.
okay,
Well,
so
okay.
this is
We'll
completely
see what happens.
unplanned, so it should be fun to put someone else.
Yeah.
I was interviewed by a quite a prominent radio station yesterday, and
Oh, good.
I just thought to myself, it would be nice to be the one asking the questions sometimes. So I'll live out my fantasy with you here now, Danny. Um,
Okay. Well, I don't know if I have the answers. I certainly don't, but I'll sure give my 2 cents worth on everything.
so
What I'm sharing, it works for me.
when you were deep within the mainstream Baptist community, um,
Hmm.
when you first what started triggering you, and I don't mean triggering in a bad way. What I mean is what started making the penny drop with you a little bit, that this isn't quite in alignment with your own personal beliefs.
Well, my story, I grew up in the Baptist church. I was very devout. It was a little farming community back in the 1950s and 60s. So that was the only option. I mean, there wasn't any internet, there weren't any Buddhist temple. I mean, nothing. It was the only option was, Christianity. And basically, farmers, the farming community, it's a very conservative, very Christian. There was a Baptist church and a Christian church in our little town. And, so I accepted it, as did pretty much everybody else. I mean, it was the whole thing. I kind of fell away in my, late teenage years. And, I went out and became a hippie for a while. But it was the fear of hell that had been instilled in me that really brought me back. And I think I shared with you how I had been, I was sitting in a steam room one time, and I was, when I was backslidden, I was a hippie, and, I'd gone away. And I started thinking, man, this is really hot, but man, hell is really hot. And if I die tonight, I'm going to hell. So that got me back into Christianity. I rededicated my life. I got born again, or saved again, or whatever, however you want to do it. And I actually went to a Bible college of this very evangelical, a very fundamentalist organization called Kansas City Youth for Christ. It was a youth ministry, and was on staff there. It was for about a decade, all during my 20s, into my late 20s. I left the ministry, but I went through the marriage and the whole American dream type thing. But and I stayed in church. My wife and I, we were in church every time the doors open. Now we left the Baptist church and we're in more the charismatic, the non-denominational. In fact, if you've heard of the International House of Prayer and Mike Bickle in Kansas City, there was a huge scandal in the whole ministry. We were in that ministry for, gosh, from the time that it started up until like, nearly 2000, I guess. But I had, it's like I began to realize, wait a minute, something just doesn't feel right about Christianity. And I was going through all the emotions, and that's all I had really known. But I began to think, man, has to be more to life and more to God and spirituality and knowing God than what I've been experiencing. And so basically, that's kind of what led me to leave Christianity. I mean, I got a divorce, and that made it easier because I kind of left my whole social network of friends, which actually they left me because, and that's another thing about being in any religious organization. If you say, wait a minute, if you don't go along with the group think, you're kind of shunned. They'll talk to you and say, well, you better believe, get back on the right track. You're going astray. But if you do leave, they're going to push you away. So anyway, through that, see, I have always just like, I don't need a Bible. I don't need anybody to tell me that there is a God. For me personally, that's self-evident, that there is a creator. And, I've always wanted to know my creator. And of course, I was doing it through Christianity. So when I left Christianity, I explored, like you did. You went through the Eastern religions and you studied Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism. And I got so much out of those religions, probably especially Taoism. And what it did was I began to realize that, wait a minute, I met Hindus that absolutely loved Jesus and Buddhists, and I realized that, wait a minute, the teachings of Jesus, they harmonize so much more with Eastern religions than they do with Moses and, the Old Testament, this angry, jealous God that will just smite you. And Jesus, and if you look at his teachings, and I've done some videos on this, I mean, he taught basically the law of karma. As you sow, you will reap. If you don't forgive others their sins, neither will your Father forgive you. And this isn't God being an arbitrary judge judging us for our sins. It's basically the sin is the judgment. And when we break God's laws, we're hurting ourselves. That's karma. Forgive and you will be forgiven. Don't judge and you won't be judged. And it was through really the writings of Paramahansa Yogananda, and who wrote the classic book Autobiography of a Yogi. And I began reading some of his books, and that's when the light bulb really went off. That wait a minute, the Jesus that I have been taught about and that I grew up believing in and I dedicated my life to is basically kind of an invention of the 4th century church state. And it really was made for control. I mean, it's the Roman emperor. He called the Council of Nicaea, said, hey, let's figure out, okay. And, they spent about, I don't know, I think 3 months, about 318 or so people, men, no women were allowed. I mean, this is a man's, and so whenever I began to see that, I began to see, wait a minute, that Christ and Christianity are two entirely different things. And that made it easier for me to leave Christianity or to, come back to Jesus and see the beauty of Jesus. I mean, I realized I'd thrown the baby out with the bathwater because I thought Christ and Christianity, Jesus came to start Christianity, and boy, if you want to follow Jesus, you got to go through the church. And I just realized, no, that's man's religion. Jesus, he taught totally different. So anyway, that's kind of a long answer, but that's
No, it was a very
kind of my
interesting
story.
answer. But it leads me on to something that I'm curious about, because I see quite often in the comment sections in your videos that you're being accused of heresy. And
Yeah.
I'm quite sure that coming from the background you came from when you initially left and followed a different path, probably people who until that point had been what you would have considered close friends were probably
Yeah.
saying that you were
Oh,
being heretical. So what's your actual? I'll share mine afterwards, but what's your views on the concept of heresy?
well, I absolutely, heresy, it's defined as not believing the doctrines of the faith or deviating from the doctrines of the faith. Now, when, Constantine, they came up with the Council of Nicaea, or the Nicene Creed. I look at it, the Nicene Creed is absolutely the foundational document of the Christian religion, of all of them. Because what it does, it says, okay, you were born guilty, and that's because of Adam and Eve, and Jesus came, the only reason he came was to die for your sin, and if you anything outside of that, and I mean the Protestant religions too, because um, the Protestant religions came out of the Catholic religions. When Martin Luther left, he was a Catholic priest. He had been trained as a Catholic, and he just saw the whole total corruption where the Catholic Church was saying, you give us your piece of property over there and we'll make sure you go to heaven when you die and we'll get your grandmother out of hell. I mean, it was just evil, evil, evil. And he saw that. And so he left and he started the Protestant religion, but he took the same doctrines of you're a worthless sinner and Jesus, came to die for your sins. And that's the only concept people have ever had about, why Jesus came. And, I see Jesus coming to say, wait a minute, I'm showing you what you can become. I'm showing you the potential. The works that I do, you can do also. A disciple is not above his teacher or his master, but every one of you that is fully trained will become like the master. And if we do the inner work, we deny ourselves, like he said, become a disciple. If any man wants to be my disciple, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. Cross, I mean, that's crucifixion, that's dying. But he wasn't advocating suicide. He was advocating death of our ego, surrender that to God. But when I talk like that, and, that's my total belief, that Jesus came to tell us we can become like he is. But to Christianity, that's heresy. And, it's that way you can't have a hierarchy that controls us if everybody begins to realize that, wait a minute, I don't need an intermediary to go to God. And this is what Jesus was saying to the woman at the well, who said, you Jews say you can only worship in the temple in Jerusalem, with the priests there, take your sacrifices and your offerings to them. He said, but we worship on Mount Gerizim in the temple, and, we go to our priest. And so who's right? And Jesus said, hey, you don't need a temple. God is spirit. So that's heresy. Heresy is going against the groupthink. And, you've been in Catholicism, and anybody who is in religion, any religion, I mean, that could be Mormon, Muslim, whatever. You don't dare start thinking outside the box that, what the priests allow you to think. And if you do, you're shunned. But, so yeah, I am a heretic, but, I love Jesus and I have a much deeper relationship with him today than I ever had before. And,
Well,
but it's because I left all the doctrine and dogma that's totally unprovable anyway.
well, I think my personal opinion is that heresy and blasphemy are both very self-defeating concepts, because when you really boil it down, heresy and blasphemy are concepts that actually can't exist. Because when I was a full-on Catholic, I thought that
Mm-hmm.
anybody that was a Baptist was a heretic, and
Oh.
in many ways committing blasphemy. But you were sitting at the other side of the Atlantic thinking that I
Mm-hmm.
was a heretic and committing
Oh,
blasphemy, and yet
absolutely.
we both claimed to be members of the body of Christ. So when you're saying that, it's very self-absorbed, because when you're claiming that anyone who doesn't believe the doctrines that your leader, self-appointed leader, has created
Mm.
is a heretic, Well, what are they committing heresy against? They're committing heresy against your opinion. That's all they're
Okay.
actually doing is committing heresy against your opinion. They're committing blasphemy against your opinion because if you're a Muslim, you think the Buddhist is committing blasphemy. If you're a Christian, you think the Taoist is committing blasphemy. But all they're doing is actually not holding the same opinion as you. Now, one of the main
Right.
central tenets of Jesus was to understand others, to live and let others live, to teach and show a better path, a better way. But he never
Mm-hmm.
once forced anyone, he never once threatened anyone. That all came later. The force and the threat and the coercion and the social shunning, etc. It came
Mm-hmm.
before him in the guise of the Pharisees and the scribes, and he
Oh.
spoke against it. He said it was wrong. Then it came after him in the body of all the denominations that have since arisen. But Jesus himself never actually coerced, threatened, or forced anyone to believe what he was teaching. He merely taught it and left it to the individual. So it brings you back to the point of what is heresy? Well, heresy by its very nature cannot exist. It's self hypocritical.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I mean, heresy is just believing heresy is not believing what the group think is. And the video that I just posted the other day, I said basically if you're going to join the Catholic religion or the Baptist or Mormon or Jehovah Witness or Muslim or 10,000s of different ones, before you can join, you have to agree to accept the beliefs of the religion as your truth and reality. And so, what you're really doing is you're entering into a shared reality with this collective that is bigger than you. And there are good people in shared realities, and good things have been done in shared realities. But there are also horrible things that have happened because now, like, we're divided and we've taken on the identity of I am a Catholic and all the Baptists are going to hell, or I am a Baptist and all the Catholics are going to hell. And I mean, like in Northern Ireland where you lived, and I remember on the news watching the Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, they were still bombing. You were in a bombing, the
Yep.
big bombing there in Northern Ireland. And that's the downside of religion because it's you believe like we do, and we're the only ones going to heaven, and you're going to hell if you don't believe us. And like you say, I mean, I had wonderful friends and I had really good experiences in my Christian,
Yeah.
I mean, I really did. And people, I mean, I still love, I mean, but they don't accept me because I don't believe like they do, but I certainly would accept them, as friends
Well,
and love to get together with them.
is not accepting someone because of their religious stance not actually going against everything that Jesus stood for?
Hmm.
Is is going to war in the name of the Prince of Peace not in itself a massive contradiction and an
Right.
insult to what the Prince of Peace actually taught us?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, fighting wars in the name of Jesus. And this is like, Constantine, okay, he fought the battle of the night of the Milvian Bridge, outside of Rome, defeated his brother-in-law's army, who was kind of like the head of Rome.
Yep.
I think his brother-in-law was killed in the battle that he cut off his head and paraded it through the streets of
Yes.
Rome on a spear. And this is the guy that actually called together and said, "Okay, let's decide exactly what Jesus is all about." And they gave us the story. And the story that they gave us is that we're sinners and we need to be saved, and we were born that way. I mean, that's it. And so it's all about control. This is what Jesus stood against. The Pharisees, every person born into that culture back then that Jesus came into, from as soon as they could begin to enter, comprehend, they were to be taught, you are to fear God and you're to obey the priests. And if you didn't, I mean, there was a long list of things, blasphemy, not worshiping God, working on the Sabbath, all of these things you were to be stoned to death for. You could be, or you could be shunned. So everybody growing up in that society, in that culture, they were literally indoctrinated from childhood. And the Catholics did the same thing after the Council of Nicaea, and then later in the fourth century, Christianity was made the official religion of the Roman Empire, and then everybody was forced to believe it. And if you didn't, you could be burned at the stake.
Well, I think Constantine was perhaps a little bit guilty of if you can't beat them, join them, because
Mm-hmm.
when you consider the early Christians who didn't even call themselves Christians, they followed the
Right.
way, which
Mm.
interestingly is very Taoistic in its title at least. But the early Christians called themselves followers of the way, and they were as near to the original teachings of Jesus as you could possibly get. And I always find it fascinating that in the end, the Roman Empire were like, what are we going to do with these troublesome Christians? It's even in
Mm-hmm.
Roman writings, because
Yeah.
the early followers of Jesus, they didn't care. They had absolutely no fear of death or
Right.
intimidation
Oh,
or any of
absolutely.
those
Yeah.
things. And in the end up, Constantine realized this is getting out of hand, it's getting out of control. And maybe the most threatening thing to the Roman Empire was that the early followers of Jesus were setting up absolute communities, but it wasn't hierarchical, structured communities. It was shared communities where everyone was equal and everyone was just looking out for each other. So therefore, there was no power to be had. There was no authority to be had. There was no profit to be had. So in the end, Constantine said, "Right, this is blown out of all control and it's spreading. So what I have to
Mm-hmm.
do now, I have to structure it, bring it in and structure it. And what will I do to get people on my side? I'll claim that Jesus appeared before me and said that if I convert, he'll let me win the battle. I'm sorry, but I cannot see Jesus appearing at any battleground and saying, "I'll
No.
let you win if you start following the teachings of peace and love and non-violence that I preached. I spent my entirety preaching. I'm now going to let you win a battle." None of that makes sense whatsoever.
Oh, no sense whatsoever. And it's only that we've been so indoctrinated because, I mean, starting, the Council of Nicaea, they gave us a Nicene Creed. Now, I mean, you could still be whatever religion you wanted, but at the Council of Nicaea, that was the marriage of church state. In other words, all the power and might of the Roman Empire. It's like, okay, now we are backing Christianity, and you set up this whole hierarchy, and you begin to train priests, and you're building churches, and every parish ended up with a church and a parish priest, and then in 385, Emperor Theodosius, who he was, I mean, Constantine was not a nice man. I mean, he was this military guy. I mean, he made his way to the top by killing. He killed his, I think, a wife and two of his kids too because he was jealous of them or something. I mean, not a nice guy. And Theodosius, the one who actually made the edict of Thessalonica that made every person, every citizen of the Roman Empire, okay, now you will take on the name of Catholic Christian as spelled out in the creed. And I mean, he actually there's a thing called the massacre of Thessalonica, where he was mad at the Thessalonian people, and so he called everybody together in this big arena, like the circus, and had soldiers lock the doors and go in and massacre 7,000 of them. That's the one that made the edict saying that, okay, everybody's going to be a Christian. The foundations of Christianity as we know it today is so different than what you were explaining about the early church, and so totally
Well,
different.
I'm just going to roll you back a little bit, and something I just picked up on what you said there. That before you knew it, every town and village and city had churches. Well, now we've touched upon this before. What is every town, village, and city having churches if not a network? A network
Mm-hmm.
that what keeps control, uh, reports back to the central authority. Now, call me old Mister Cynic if you wish, but I think that sounds suspiciously like a secret police network, at least in its
A
early
hundred,
formation. Anyway,
100%. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I mean, and you made this statement, and I'd never thought of this before, but the confession, that was kind of so that they could keep control over the people and know what's going on. I mean, during
that's
the
why it was set up.
Inquisition, we can't comprehend what the Inquisition was like, to live through that, to where you're terrified to say something. It's like in the Judaism. When Jesus came in, if you dared speak against the law or even question the law of Moses or the priests, I mean, you could be in deep trouble. I mean, you could be stoned to death. And if you dared question church authority, even secretly, um, you could be there's a scripture in the Old Testament, it's Deuteronomy 6, and it says, if your very own brother or your son or your daughter or the wife that you love or your best friend secretly says to you, let's think about other gods, than this law of Moses and Yahweh. He said, you are to stone them to death. He said, you must be the first one to cast a stone and then the rest of the people. And that's secret police, like you were saying. That's an evil reign of terror, and that's what the Inquisition, the Catholic Church was. And
Yeah,
you know,
and what I find troubling in a sense is if you sit down, your average everyday mainstream following Christian of pretty much any denomination, and you ask them to tell you the history of their church and the history of the origins of Yahweh, or the origins of the Mosaic beliefs, or any of these things, they nearly almost always will tell you a different version of events from what truly happened. Or, depending on which denomination they come from, they will have a different version of rolling back the history. And you usually find that they've been fed a very different story of the origins of Yahweh to what the true origins, according to
mm-hmm,
historians at least, actually are. And ultimately, it goes back that far that nobody can really claim to know the origins of Yahweh. I mean, some claim he was a war god,
yeah,
some claim he was a storm god, some claim, so nobody really knows for absolute
mm-hmm,
certain. Now,
mm-hmm,
I would imagine that if I was God sitting on a throne, I would make sure that everybody knew my origin story. I would make sure that it was known to everyone what my origin story was. And what I also find very confusing is that throughout the early points of the Old Testament, at least, God was always showing up. He was always appearing and showing up and sending things and giving signs. And where did he go? Why does he not do that nowadays?
yeah. Well,
You know,
I think
you
one of
know,
them.
personal appearances? Was it, was it not in his contract anymore, or what happened?
Yeah, I I always my favorite Old Testament story that people actually believed, it's in what is it? It's in Joshua 10, and it's when Joshua's army is fighting against five kings' armies, and God is actually fighting for them, and He's up in heaven casting down giant hailstones on the enemies, and God is killing more of the enemies than Joshua's army, but they're fighting. Okay, so God's throwing down these hailstones, but Joshua realizes that it's going to be dark soon, and he's afraid that they're not going to be able to finish the battle, and some of the people are going to escape. So Joshua prays to God to stop the sun from setting, and so God stops the sun from setting for and not going down for about a day, so Joshua could finish the battle before dark. And I'm thinking, wouldn't it have been easier for God just to throw down more hailstones? And you think about that story. I mean, I do not believe for a second that that is true, but people did believe it's 100% true. And if you believe, like the Bible says, and I did a whole video on this one time, and I got a whole list of all the scriptures, but if you believe that the earth was set on foundations, pillars, and it's unmovable as the center of the earth, and the sun rises in the morning and sets in the west and hurries back to the place and makes its orbit around, a flat earth, it makes sense. Yeah, I mean, you just stop the sun. So, and we're still living by that,
Yeah,
today, that, the Old Testament and Yahweh, and it's
yeah.
interesting too that, well, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Danny. Please finish your point.
All I was going to say is Jesus went into the temple against the priest, the high priest. These are the ones that brought him the woman caught in adultery, and he totally shut them down. But he's talking to them later, and he's trying to, and they're accusing him for calling God his father. He said, "My God is my father." And, he said, "You don't know me." And he said, "You don't know my father." He said, "Your father is the devil."
Yeah,
Now, who was he talking about if he wasn't talking about Yahweh? And,
yeah,
Christianity is so, oh, Yahweh is God's father. Yeah, in the Old Testament, well, he sent plagues and famine, and he killed women and children, and he wiped out villages, and he forced Israel to kill and eat their own children. And he said, "I'll delight in doing these things to you." And he created war and genocide. And then Jesus, who is actually doing this in the Old Testament, shows up and says, "Love one another and turn the other cheek, and blessed are the peacemakers." And how Christianity can say, "Oh, no, there's no contradiction there." I was like, come on, wake up. I mean, but indoctrination is so deep, and the fear of questioning what we've been taught not to
yeah.
question is so deep. And I mean, it's hard. I had to do it. I mean, it's not easy.
I think I think you've hit a very big nail on the head there. That there's this inbuilt, driven in fear of questioning anything. If you find yourself questioning,
You,
I remember it. I remember it when I first started out in my own personal spiritual journey. When you start questioning, you start thinking, "Oh, the devil's overtaken me. I'm going to burn in hell. I'm going to." You're just terrified to question. And it wasn't
yeah.
until I sat down, and I still remember it as clear as it was yesterday. I sat down, and as I was just first starting to learn how to meditate and trying to meditate, and I couldn't. Do you know? I closed my eyes and I tried to feel the presence of God, and all I felt was emptiness. There was. It scared me, to be truthful with you. I thought, am I detached from God? Has God left me, abandoned me? I felt there was nothing. There just wasn't anything, and it scared me and it troubled me. And for a full day, I thought about nothing else. And that evening, I sat down again and I closed my eyes. And before I began to meditate, I says, "God, let me know you without fear. Let me know you fully and without fear." And during a series of 3 or 4 meditations over the next few evenings, as I remember, this was just when I was first starting into this, a series of 3 or 4 meditations after me asking, "Let me know you without fear." That emptiness I had felt a few evenings earlier started being replaced with a knowing, a feeling, and it's grown stronger and stronger ever since. And in many ways, I think the reason for it was because I asked, "Let me know you without fear." So for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
probably in my whole entire life of growing up in a church community, for the first time in my whole entire life, I had actually been approaching what actually is God, rather than what is man's invention for me to believe. I started finding him for myself. And I think that's one of the things that hurts me more than anything, is that there's so many people out there, and as Jesus even said it, you're stopping people from knowing God. And there's so many people out there being stopped, being prevented from knowing God. And if the God that they're claiming is going to burn me in hell is actually God, then why is there so many versions of him? If that was God, he would
Mm-hmm.
say, "Listen," and he used to turn up all the time, like in the Old Testament. Surely he would come back. Even surely he could spare us 2 minutes just to come back and say, "Right, it's me. This is what you all believe. On you go." Instead of letting it. I thought he wasn't a God of confusion. So why all the denominations? And it really hurts me that, when I think about that one line, you're stopping people from knowing God, and yet it's still going on to this day, and people call me the heretic. People call me the blasphemer. It's just, and it's, there's two ways you can go in this world. You can go the way of faith, which is a high vibrational frequency, or you can
Mm-hmm.
go the way of fear, which is a very low hate-filled frequency. And if you're trying to tell people that being in a state of fear is a praise of the creator of all that there is, then you really are leading them down a very, very dark path. And it's such a dark path that they detest the light. It's such a dark path that when someone comes along trying to explain to them, "Look, this is really what Jesus was saying," and I stand to make no money from this. I stand to hold no power from this. In fact, I stand to be hated by so many for what I'm saying. But I'm telling you, this is the light of which Jesus spoke. This is what he meant when he said, "I'm the light of the world." And when you've been led into such darkness by people who stand to make profit and power out of it, that to me, that's evil. And you're holding people in fear, and fear can lead to nothing but hate and evil.
Oh, I so totally agree with you on that. Everything you said. It's yeah, and once any system of belief gets firmly established, just in the mind of one generation, and you got this system, a hierarchical system set up to enforce it, and it's being enforced by, if you don't believe this, we'll kill you. Well, once that's established, it takes on a life of its own. It's a system, and the system will continue. And people fight to defend the system because that's all they know. I mean, a child's born, the first thing they're done, they're either circumcised on the eighth day, you're in the club, or you're baptized as an infant, you're in the club. And as you grow up, and the Jesuits knew this, they had that saying, "Give me a child until he's 7 and I will give you the man." And that means that you take that child, and up to the age of 7, when they don't, I mean, they'll believe in Santa Claus, they'll believe everything, that you teach them. And these authority figures and these massive cathedrals and the massive priest up here, and you call him Father, Father, forgive my sins. I mean, that becomes their truth and their reality. And everybody else is in the same shared reality because they've all been brought up in the same thing. And this is what, when Jesus said, "I came to seek and save the lost," I mean, these people were so lost in fear of this angry, jealous God, Yahweh, and just and like you said, the scripture, I mean, he told the priest, he said, you lock the doors to the kingdom of heaven. You keep people from finding it. You don't let people enter. And, Jesus was so against the priesthood, I mean, he stood against them. And yet we look at, religion as, oh, yeah, we got to believe. But yeah, which religion, the Mormons, Jehovah Witness, the Baptists, the Catholics, they all, we have the only true Jesus. Jesus belongs to us. No, I mean, that's not, no. Jesus is
Well,
beyond
here's
religion.
absolutely, absolutely. And here's something that I actually am touching upon in my forthcoming book, the Quantum Gospels, is Jesus in the Gospel of John. Jesus made a lot of references that was beginning with "I am." I am the way, the truth, the life. I
Mm-hmm.
am the gate. I am, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Now think about it. When Jesus was saying "I am," he was actually because he grew up in a Jewish community. He knew that the people he was speaking to would have known the Torah,
Mm-hmm.
and he was referencing back to Exodus when God introduced himself as I am that I
I
am.
am.
Now, what is I am? What did God mean by I am? He meant I am the all. I am everything. I am
Mm-hmm.
all of creation. I am creation and all of creation. I am everything. I am, and that therefore is the unified field that we speak of as well. Now, when Jesus was starting all these statements with I am, he even said before Abraham I am. Now, he never said before Abraham I was. He said before Abraham I am, meaning it's an eternity. He's part of an eternal being, and he said, and all the times he used these expressions, I am, he was always as well backing it up with, and you and I are one. You're part of me, I'm
Yeah.
part of you. So he was saying that we all are I am. We all are the I am. And so therefore it brings you to the point where he said, and it's one that mainstream Christianity loves to roll out as an evidence for what they're claiming. When they use the I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now,
Mm-hmm.
look at that from a non-fear point. That's looking at it from a point of view of fear. It has to be Jesus, otherwise we're going to burn in hell, because he said he's the way, the truth, and the
Mm-hmm.
life. But if you look at the context of what Jesus truly meant by I am, then he was saying, I am, which is all of us, which is the Father, which is the unified field, which is creation, which is you, which is me, which is everything. Because we're all, if you think of a raindrop falling into the ocean, it's not a single it's not a single raindrop. It's part of the ocean. When you think of it, a wave on the ocean top, that wave is not separate from the ocean. It looks separate. It appears separate.
Mm-hmm.
For it momentarily has almost a separate identity, but it's still part of the ocean. Now, this is what Jesus was saying. I am. We are all. Before Abraham was, I am everything.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham was I am. Before Abraham was I am. Everything is I am. Now, if he's saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, he was saying that by your understanding and recognizing the nature of reality, that we're all part of each other, we're all part of one, that everything is energy. That's how you come to the Father. That's how you start finding realizations and truth. And that's the true meaning of I am, no one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The I am is the way, the truth, and the life. And it's all of us.
Oh, absolutely. I love that, Joseph. And that John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That is funny. There's, I think, 31,102 verses in the Bible. Most Christians can quote John 3:16 and John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and life. You don't go to the well. You read that in context, though. Okay, Jesus is saying he just had the Last Supper, and Judas had just gone to betray him. He had just told Peter that, you're going to deny me. And so that's the setup. And the very next thing after he tells Peter, you're going to deny me, he said, but don't worry about it. Don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. I'm going to go, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And he said, and you know the way that I'm going. And I think it was Philip said, we don't know the way. And he said, I am the way. But he was talking about oneness with the Father and our being one, because if you go a little further in John 14, he says, in that day you will know that I am in the Father and the Father is in me and I am in you, and the works that I do you shall do also, and even greater works than these, because I go to the Father. And then you go on to John chapter 17, and he really spells it out. And all of this happened within it's like one conversation. It's not like, over days or months or years. This is right before he was crucified. And in John 17, he so clearly, prays for us. Father, may they be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, that they may be perfectly united. And when we find that oneness that Jesus was talking about, well, that's the mother load. That's it. We are the I
Yep.
am in the eternal now. And Christianity has made
Yeah,
the
we are.
greatest
All of
blasphemy.
us,
Yeah.
everything, everyone.
Everybody.
And do you know what that
Everything.
means?
It's,
It, it means
go
that
ahead.
do you know what it means? It means that Jesus is the I am. I don't dispute that. Jesus is the I
Oh, I
am.
don't either.
So is Danny sitting. So is Danny sitting in the USA. So is
Right.
Joseph sitting here in Ireland.
Mhm.
But do you know what else? So is every single Catholic. So
Everybody
is every
else,
single Jew. So is every single Muslim. So is every single Hindu. We are all the I am. All
Yeah.
of us are the I
The
am. So
the
it
own
shows you how pointless any form of hatred or bigotry or anything like that actually is, because you know who
yes.
are you arguing with? You're arguing
Yeah.
with your own essence, just
Yeah.
expressed in a different way.
Preach it. Yeah. Oh, you got it right there. You got it, That's it. Jesus was teaching we are all one. That it's so clear. But religion has made it, oh no, that's blasphemy. Don't you dare even think you're one with God. You're a worthless worm.
Well, we've
You
already
know.
explained. We've already explained how ridiculous blasphemy actually is.
Oh, it is. But it's not ridiculous to the people who are in fear, because,
Yeah.
and you explained it so beautifully earlier. It's either faith or fear. And I tell people, okay, just read the Gospels. Even the four, and I think the four Gospels, it's a very watered down version of what Jesus actually said.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it says in John, if all the things that Jesus did were put into a book, it'd be, you couldn't even, it'd be way more than the world could even hold.
And then
But
as I cover in the upcoming book, the Quantum Gospels, you've it's not just the four canonical gospels. Then you've got the findings of in 1945 of the Nag
oh
Hammadi
yeah,
Library. You have the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and lots of other writings. And when you look at them, particularly the Gospel of Thomas, it's all about the I am and the quantum belief and so forth. Now,
oh,
these
absolutely.
were hidden, and there was a massive attempt to destroy them from existence. Why?
Because you can't have a hierarchy, of people that control the other people. See, and this is another thing in that John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Right before Jesus said that, he had washed the disciples' feet, okay? And he told the disciples, he said, do you understand what I just did for you? He said, you call me Lord and Master, and that's true because I am. But if I, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, I am giving you the example that you, as my followers, as my disciples, you are to wash one another's feet and the feet of the people you serve. And if you see in the early church, the reason it was spreading so rapidly and everybody was joining and there was great love and peace is because the kingdom of heaven manifested in a microcosm there in Jerusalem. And this was by the people, the disciples of Jesus, who had literally lived with him for 3 years and had learned from him. And they realized that, hey, it's not about hierarchy. And I love it when Peter and John were going into the temple, and there was the lame man there, and he was begging for, he said, some money. And they said, we don't have any silver or gold, but what we do have,
Yeah.
we'll give to you. He said, be healed in the name of Jesus. And the man was. And, it's so totally opposite of, here, the leaders of the church, the ones that should be flying around in their jets and driving around in fancy, golden chariots, the latest sports model, but there, we don't have any gold. We have love, we have joy, we have peace, and we want to give it to you. And, it's
Yeah.
just, it's Christianity and Christ and Christianity are two very different things. And,
Yeah.
you're certainly right. I think when Constantine said, well, if you can't beat him, join him, we can use this. And he understood human psychology, and he understood how to set up systems of control, a hierarchy. And basically, Christianity was set up exactly the same way as Judaism was, a hierarchy of priests.
Yeah.
This is the law. You disobey, and the thing is, and we've talked about this before, once people, accept that as truth, the fear of leaving, the fear of questioning, don't think about that, because, don't go there, or you'll be shunned, and, you'll go to hell, and
Well,
God's going to be angry. It's
when you
sad,
look at
really.
when you look at the true essence of Jesus and Jesus's message, and the very earliest, the very first followers of him, when you look at that, and then when you look at the followers of Buddha, or the followers of Taoism, or the earliest followers of Hindu, when you look at all these earliest followers of great spiritual masters, the one common thing you'll find, among many common things, but the one common thing you'll find is there's no hierarchical structure. That yes, there's a central teacher. Yes, that central teacher is given reverence and respect, but that's because they respect what he's showing them. But he's not
Mm-hmm.
sitting on any big throne. He's not being carried shoulder high. He's not sitting in a mansion. Those spiritual leaders were very much in and among their own people, and there was a harmony, there was a unity, there was a community. But then, if you look at any actual religious system that's been set up by man in the name of such and such a master, it's always structured in a man's way, a human man's way of thinking, where it's hierarchical, it's power based, they always need money. Apparently, God's useless with cash because he always needs more money. It's
Could get
always
a
set
new
up in
jet.
those kind of ways. What's that?
Got to buy a new jet, new
Absolutely,
private
God needs a
jet.
jet.
Yeah,
God needs a
yeah,
private jet.
and a sports car.
As I don't know if you're a fan of the Star Trek movies, but there's one of them where some alien beings claim. I've only ever seen a clip of it. Some alien beings claiming that he's God, and Kirk says to him, "Well, why does God need a spaceship?
That's a good thing. Yeah.
Why does God need a private jet?"
God needs your money. Send it to my address.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
all knowing, all seeing, all powerful, but he just can't handle cash.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems almost comical to me. I mean, in fact, sometimes I laugh at just the absurdity of it, but I also weep because people are so deeply that's their very truth, their identity. And I'm not saying there aren't good people.
Yeah.
I tell people, if you just read the Gospels and try to detach Jesus from it, read it as if you've never seen a Bible, never heard a sermon, don't know anything about Christianity or anything. Just read the Gospels and see what you come up with. And if you just read the Gospels, not knowing anything else, and just and then you ask, well, what's Jesus teaching? Well, he's teaching that we're all one with God. We're teaching that he teaches that God is the most loving Father. He's forgiving. He's like the parable of the prodigal son. He's just beautiful. He's just exactly like Jesus is, and that we can be like Jesus. We can do the things totally different. But there's so much fear in the Old Testament, and so much, in the writings of Paul, of, that's the main doctrines of Christianity that we must accept and believe, before we can be a Christian. And, we do that, then there's fear of questioning. And, it's just,
Oh yeah, of course.
I don't know. But anyway, we're coming up on an hour or so, but give me some last thoughts. Why don't you share something? I've loved this. We got to do this again. Get this
Of
out.
course, absolutely. Any time. No, I enjoyed it today as well. As I say, look, my last thoughts would be for today at least. I've always got something to say. My last thoughts for today would be, you know, to go into John, go into John, which I've always said is a gospel that I absolutely love. But go into John,
Me too.
look at the I am statements, and then try and look at them through different eyes. As I say, I've the sort of the third and final of this three-part book series coming out now in a few days' time, actually. But I go into it quite deeply in that book. Go into the I am statements and remove the fear-based element of those I am statements. Remove the exclusivity of
Mm,
those I am statements, and try and read them assuming that we're all I am, that we're all one, and they take on a whole new life. They take on a life of their own then, and they take on
mm,
a very beautiful meaning. So, I would ask if anybody is interested, just go into the Gospel of John and read over the I am statements again. Just see what you think.
mm. That's excellent advice. That's what I tell people too. Just go by Jesus. And and I people will call me a heretic, a blasphemer, and a false prophet. And I'm saying, like, look, all I'm doing is saying, follow Jesus, love Jesus, believe what Jesus said. Like, I don't believe, like I said earlier, Joshua 10, that, Yahweh was up in heaven casting down stones and he stopped the sun. It gets so dang complex and divisive when you got this whole big Bible you got to interpret Jesus through. But when you just interpret him through the Gospels, man, nobody could hate Jesus. Literally, you can't.
Well, if
You can
someone
hate
tell if someone
Christianity.
accuses me of being a blasphemer or a heretic, the only thing I can say back to them is, actually, I'm not, and neither are you. We just have different opinions.
Well, I have Joseph's contact information and how to purchase his books in the description box. Check them out. I'm sure you'll love them. And thank you for watching. If you're still here, give it a like, and let's work to make the world a better place for all peoples.